There's been a lot of talk lately regarding the Abomination of Desolation, and there's been a lot of misunderstanding regarding it too. This is Off the Cuff, and I'm Steve from TorahFamily.org. Let's talk about it. We know deception is coming, and so many believe they won't be deceived, all the while forgetting that Satan deceived a third of the angels into following him, and now he comes as an angel of light to deceive all he can on earth. A friend of mine recently shared an image on Facebook that showed how deception can be right in front of us, and we don't even see it. It really shows how things aren't always as they appear. In fact, they can appear quite the opposite of what they actually are. Here's the image my friend shared. Please notice the text says these horizontal lines are straight and parallel, and I would also add they are perfectly perpendicular with all the vertical lines as well. Now, at a quick glance, you're probably laughing at me saying something like, "That's impossible. They're obviously angled." But take a moment. Look closer. If needed, hit pause even, and measure them if you like. When you do, you'll see they truly are perfectly horizontal and perpendicular with the vertical lines. Crazy, right? Something that looks so obvious is actually not so obvious. 3 times in Matthew 24, we see where Yeshua warns about being deceived in the end times. So we know a time of deception is coming. A deception so strong that even the elect could be deceived if that were possible. That's a powerful deception, many of which they believe they won't be deceived. But when looking at this image, many of you thought I was crazy for telling you the lines were completely straight and parallel. But when you examined it closer, you realized you were wrong. I'm telling you right now, a powerful and believable deception is coming. A deception the enemy has planted in the church for years so believers would fall prey to it. So, when it all begins to play out like they were told, they'll fall for it. Deception doesn't always come from the bold lie. It can come through the cunning, crafty impostor just the same. Here's the thing. The general belief that's been held to for years is that the sacrificial system will be reinstated, and then after that happens, the Antichrist will come and bring those sacrifices to an end and set up the abomination of desolation until Yeshua comes at the end. But I'm here to tell you, this belief is wrong. But it's exactly what the enemy wants you to believe. This belief comes from a wrong interpretation of a verse from Daniel chapter 9. Though I cover this in great detail in our teachings, part 1 and part 2 of Satan's Greatest Masquerade, I want to briefly cover it here. However, I strongly encourage you to watch those 2 teachings. They're only 20 minutes each. Here we see Daniel 9:27. Many believe the covenant spoken of here is a peace treaty. They believe it will be for 7 years because of the 7. Then they believe the Anti-Messiah will stop all sacrifices at the temple, which will have been already established. However, that mentality is not only wrong, it's what the enemy wants us to believe. I've been saying for years that the covenant spoken of here is just that, a covenant. The new covenant, to be exact. That which Yeshua establishes at Mount Sinai with his bride on Shavuot. That means the he being spoken of here in verse 27 is referring to Yeshua and not the Antichrist. The next part of verse 27 says, "In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering." This is where many believe the Anti-Messiah will put an end to the sacrificial system. However, I believe it's quite the opposite. If you see our teachings titled, "The Tent," and the image of the beast, you know that the Antichrist will set up the original tent of meeting and the Ark of the Covenant to use them for his purposes. In fact, that will be the deception. It's in this where the false prophet and the Antichrist sets up the sacrificial system, but not in accordance to the Torah. Thus, the sacrificial system under them is an abomination to Yahweh. Many respond with saying it has to be the Antichrist in verse 27 because of what we see in Daniel 11:31 and 12:11. And I agree. These verses in the English definitely makes it look like the Antichrist abolishes the sacrifices. However, the Hebrew word in these verses carries a different meaning. The word used in these verses actually means to set aside. However, Daniel 9:27 gives a clear understanding that the sacrifices are brought to an end. At first glance, one could say no big deal. However, it is a big deal. We can't forget, Daniel wrote all three of these references. Daniel would have used the same word in all three of these references if they were to mean the same thing. As it is, he didn't. Daniel 11:31 and Daniel 12:11 are not talking about something which is already set in place, but rather what should be set up. Let me explain. I truly believe the tent and the ark will be set back up. At that moment, they have the option to do the sacrifices properly. However, they set aside the proper way of doing the sacrifices. This results in setting it all up in a way that's an abomination to Yahweh. So the proper way is turned away or set aside, as the word describes in Daniel 11:31 and Daniel 12:11, which again is different from the word given in Daniel 9:27, which means to cease or to end. So these verses aren't talking about something which is already set in place and brought to an end, but rather set up in a way that's in error to begin with, which in turn means they're set up as an abomination to Yahweh. And this will be the abomination that Yeshua brings to an end when he conquers Jerusalem and sets up his kingdom. This is the abomination that Yeshua tells the people of Judah to flee when they see it, as given here in Matthew 24 and Mark 13. Now, leaving these verses up, when the modern state of Israel officially reinstitutes the sacrifices again on the Temple Mount, what do you think the response of the Islamic nations will be? You guessed it. They'll surround Jerusalem. Thus, we see Luke's account give a slightly different take on the same account from Matthew 24 and Mark 13. Luke records it as, when you see Jerusalem being surrounded, where the other two accounts mention the abomination of desolation. So, the sacrifices themselves will be the abomination of desolation and be the very cause for Jerusalem to get surrounded, as Luke mentions. But the big question is, why are these sacrifices an abomination to Yahweh? We know when Ezekiel was given the vision regarding the temple, he was shown the sacrificial system will be reinstituted for the millennium under Yeshua, shown here in Ezekiel chapter 40, verse 41, and Ezekiel 43, verse 18, Ezekiel 43, verse 24, Ezekiel 44, verse 11, Ezekiel 44, verse 15, Ezekiel 46, verse 2, and Ezekiel 46, verse 24. And this all goes in complete harmony with Yeshua's words of how nothing will pass from the law until heaven and earth disappear. So the sacrifices will continue. And this is also in complete harmony with what we see in Isaiah chapter 2, verse 3, and Micah chapter 4, verse 2, of what happens when Yeshua reigns. The law will go out from Zion, the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem. So what makes the sacrificial system under the modern state of Israel an abomination? Seriously. Let's start with the priesthood themselves. I noted this in our teaching on Satan's little season. Have you ever wondered why the Antichrist and the false prophet are thrown alive into the lake of fire in Revelation 19? Isaiah 46:10 says he makes known the end from the beginning, from ancient times what is still to come. So, where do we see something like this happening before? We see it with Korah in Numbers chapter 16. He was literally cast directly into Sheol alive, just like we see in Revelation 19. But did you see how the verse in Revelation says it's the beast and the false prophet who gets thrown into the lake of fire? Why? Because the false prophet will be the high priest in Jerusalem during the last days. We can't forget who the two beasts in Revelation represent. Back in the day, the kingdom of Israel was divided into two: the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom and the 2 tribes of the southern kingdom. Now, how many horns are on the first beast? 10, representing the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom. How many horns were on the second beast? 2, representing the 2 tribes of the southern kingdom. And so the false prophet comes from there. You see, in the account of Korah and his followers, the people were given a warning. Numbers chapter 16 says the exact same fate of Korah will be given to anyone who is not a descendant of Aaron, yet burns incense before Yahweh. The same judgment. I know some would say, but Steve, do you really believe the presence of Yahweh will be over the ark during this time under the Antichrist? And my answer is, absolutely not. Then the response would be, then they're not offering incense before Yahweh as the verse says. However, 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 2, and 1 Chronicles 13, verse 6, says the name of the ark itself is Yahweh. Thus, they will offer incense before Yahweh because that's the name of the ark. Thus, when they present the incense on the altar of incense, which sets in front of the ark, they'll be presenting it before Yahweh because Yahweh is the name of the ark. And that's only to be done by the lineage of Aaron. So that would explain why the false prophet gets thrown into the lake of fire. He's wrongfully serving as high priest, as Korah desired. But why then does the Antichrist get thrown into the lake of fire too? The verses only apply to those who wrongfully go into the temple and burn incense. But what do we read about the Antichrist from Paul? That's right. The Antichrist, the man of lawlessness, exalts himself over everything that is called God. Meaning what? He takes the authority for himself, just like Korah tried, and does what he wants in the temple. It says he even sets himself up in the temple, which means he sets himself up as a high priest, even claims himself to be God. And that's why we see these two individuals thrown into the lake of fire. Yahweh warned it would happen, and we see it will. Thus, the sacrificial system will be an abomination because it will be ran by a priesthood that's not of Yahweh. It will be a priesthood rejected like Korah. Korah and his followers were Levites. I'll give you that. But they weren't from the tribe of Aaron. And while the modern state of Israel claims they have the priesthood, in the eyes of Yahweh, their reasons aren't legit, making every single sacrifice they do an abomination in the eyes of Yahweh. Please understand, if there were no other reason to consider, the sacrificial system alone will be an abomination before Yahweh. It would be reason enough. Yet, after they're all but destroyed at the invasion from being surrounded, the Antichrist saves the day and they resume the sacrifices all over again. He eventually sets himself up in the temple, or at least assumes some kind of a role of the high priest. Exactly when he does this in the timeline of events, we're not sure. However, something of this nature is given to us in history as well. 2 Chronicles chapter 26 records that after King Uzziah became powerful, he became prideful, most likely felt unbeatable. As a result, he tried to burn incense in the temple, but the priesthood of the day opposed him. Before he could offer any incense, they opposed him in the holy place. Uzziah began to argue with them. As he did, leprosy broke out on his forehead. He was quickly ushered out before he ever offered the incense. But the point is, we see a king rise up and try to assume the role of a high priest. Yahweh spared Uzziah's life before he committed the sin, but it definitely humiliated him. However, we see in the future the Antichrist sets himself up in the temple as a high priest and completes what Uzziah set out to do. And so we see his fate will be just like that of the false prophet and Korah. But again, this alone shows us all the sacrifices in the temple will be abominations to Yahweh, because the priesthood is not appointed by Yahweh. Thus Yahweh's words through Isaiah in chapter 66. This is the one I esteem, he who is humble and contrite in spirit, and trembles at my word. But whoever sacrifices a bull is like one who kills a man, and whoever offers a lamb, like one who breaks a dog's neck. Whoever makes a grain offering is like one who presents pig's blood, and whoever burns memorial incense, like one who worships an idol. They have chosen their own ways, and their souls delight in their abominations. Thus, the sacrificial system will be the abomination of desolation. And we can see right here in this text how the opening verse opposes the Antichrist himself. Because why? Just like Uzziah, it was pride that caused him to go in and offer the incense. So this verse right here addresses the Antichrist. And then the rest of the verses address the priesthood themselves, showing everything they present as an abomination to Yahweh. But there are other things to give concern as to why the sacrificial system will be an abomination to Yahweh. Please consider what Yahweh said to Moses regarding everything for the temple. Exodus 25, verse 40. See that you make them according to the pattern shown you on the mountain. Later, in Deuteronomy, when Moses was passing the baton off to Joshua, we see how nothing is to be added or subtracted from what Yahweh gave. And we read in the book of Hebrews how everything in the temple on earth is a replica of what's in the temple in heaven. So they were warned to make everything to the pattern shown to Moses. And yet we see two instances from the Temple Institute where it seems they've made their own modifications. First is the table of showbread. These images of the table of showbread are from the Temple Institute's Facebook page. When compared to the instructions given in the Torah regarding this table, we see shelving has been added by the Temple Institute. However, there's no instruction in the Torah for these shelves. The instructions in Exodus 25 are to put the bread on the table itself. It says nothing about making any added shelving or having the bread on shelves for any purpose at any time. Yet, from the images given, it seems they intend on placing this table with its added shelving in the holy place with the menorah and the altar of incense. I understand the debates for things in the inner court, like how big could the altar be, and can we make adjustments on how we fill the water laver, and things like that. But this is a piece of furniture that goes into the holy place of the temple. It just seems to me there should be no wiggle room on this. We're given specific instructions for it. We should keep to those instructions. And then we have the lamp of Helena Mamalka. They plan on placing this replica over the entrance to the holy place of the temple. Helena Mamalka was a convert to Judaism in the 1st century. She donated the lamp to the temple. Please listen to the words given from a video the Temple Institute YouTube channel posted on February 15th of 2011. It was specifically made regarding Queen Helena and the recreation of the lamp she gave to the temple. The Temple Institute, in response to the great yearning for the building of the Holy Temple, as expressed by countless Jews and Gentiles the world over, has begun to create the golden lamp of Queen Helena. The recreation of the golden nevrachet, or lamp, of Queen Helena is being done with the hope that it will, once again, fulfill its role as the light-filled clarion call for all nations to turn their eyes and hearts toward Jerusalem and the Holy Temple. May we merit to build it speedily and in our days. This golden lamp, which hung in front of the main doors to the great sanctuary of the temple, served to bestow honor upon the daily service in the Holy Temple, and also functioned as a signal to all those in Jerusalem that the time had come for the recitation of the morning Shema. The golden lamp being recreated today by the Temple Institute is to be fully plated in gold and will feature large crystals that will enhance the effect of the light-filled orb. Master craftsman Chaim Odom, the designer and executor of the golden menorah, is currently hard at work recreating the golden lamp of Queen Helena. Based on the Talmudic description of the lamp and also on his artistic vision, Chaim Odom is fashioning what promises to be a stunning, singular, and unique piece for the soon-to-be rebuilt Holy Temple. Ladies and gentlemen, even if we're misunderstanding something regarding the table of showbread, which I don't believe we are, but let's just say we are for a moment, there's no doubt this lamp they plan to put above the entrance of the temple is clearly adding to the Torah. There's simply no way around this. And while there's no doubt in my mind their motives are to do what's right, I have serious concern with how they're carrying them out. Remember, deception is coming. Will you recognize it? From the priesthood to the table of showbread and the lamp of Queen Helena over the temple entrance, there's reason to believe the sacrifices done there will not be acceptable to Yahweh. But the enemy will do all he can to make the world believe otherwise. He'll even cause fire to come down from the sky just like it did for King Solomon. When we see them reinstitute the temple sacrifices, and we see Jerusalem get surrounded because of those sacrifices, you need to know the words of Yeshua are being fulfilled. and it has begun. Well, that's all I have for this teaching. Think about it. Pray about it. But more than anything, be a doer of the word and not a hearer only. Until next time, Shalom.